Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take some really compelling sources on a topic and, well, we dig in to pull out the most fascinating bits for you.
That's the plan.
And today, we're journeying back, way back, to northeastern Australia, specifically the Kimberley region, looking at some Aboriginal rock art that's only recently been properly identified.
Exactly. We've got a great research article here from Australian Archaeology. It's by Paula Motta and colleagues. And there's also a news report that sums up their key findings.
Okay.
And our mission, really, is to get our heads around this newly named style. They're calling it Linear Naturalistic Figures, or LNF for short.
LNF. Got it.
We want to figure out, how does recognizing this style change the bigger picture of Kimberley art history, and what hints does it give us about the people, the artists behind it?
Right. Expect some real aha moments connecting with these incredibly ancient cultures.
Yeah, definitely.
So before we dive straight into LNF, maybe we should quickly sketch out what the sort of established understanding of Kimberley rock art looked like until now. It helps set the stage.
Good idea. Yeah, for a long time, researchers names like Maynard, Walsh, Welch come to mind. They've pieced together a kind of sequence, a chronology of different styles.
A timeline, basically.
Pretty much. It
Yeah.
starts super old with things like cupels, just simple cup shapes hammered into the rock.
Uh-huh.
Then you get the Irregular Infill Animal Period, IIAP. Big animal figures often filled right in with paint.
Okay, IIAP.
After that, the Guion figures appear. Really distinctive, sort of elegant, human-like figures, lots of detail sometimes.
I've seen pictures of those. Very striking.
They are. Then comes the static polychrome style, also human figures, but maybe more formal, less dynamic than Guion.
Okay.
Then we see stout figures, human forms again, often with this kind of rayed halo thing around the head.
Interesting.
Followed by painted hand style, which is a bit more schematic, animals, people, those classic hand stencils.
The hand stencils, yeah.
Later, much later, you get the really iconic Wandjina art, those big spirit ancestor figures.
Right, those are very well known.
Yeah, and that tradition continues right up to contemporary times in some ways. And finally, there's contact art, showing, ships, guns, things that came with European arrival.
So that's the broad sweep, oldest to newest, more or less.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah.
Though, there could definitely be overlaps between some of these styles. It's not always perfectly neat stages.
Makes sense.
And the crucial thing for us today is that this new style, LNF, was often just lumped in with that earlier Irregular Infill Animal Period, the IIAP. People thought it was maybe just a variation of it.
Okay, so it wasn't seen as its own thing until recently. Let's get into it then. What makes these linear naturalistic figures, LNF, different? What did Dr. Motta's team find? This was part of the Kimberley Visions project, right? Huge undertaking.
Massive project. Yeah, they worked with the Balanggarra Aboriginal Corporation, documented over 1,100 sites. Incredible. And across 22 of those sites, mainly in the Drysdale and King George River areas, they found about 98 motifs that they didn't quite fit neatly into IIAP, even though they looked a bit similar at first glance.
So what were the key differences they spotted?
Okay, well, first off, subject matter. LNF is overwhelmingly animals. Big ones, too. Often over 80 centimeters long.
Nearly 3 feet. What kinds of animals?
Mostly macropods, so kangaroos, wallabies, but also flying foxes, some fish, reptiles like goannas, and birds, too. There are a few plants and shapes they couldn't identify, but it's really dominated by the animals.
Okay, so a clear focus on fauna, especially those big macropods. What about the style, the way they're painted? You said it was often lumped with IIP, which had that infill.
Exactly, and that's the biggest visual difference. The name gives it away. Linear Naturalistic Figures.
Linear, okay.
It's all about the outline. A clear, continuous line defining the shape of the animal. Unlike IIAP, where figures are often solidly colored in or have patterns inside, LNF figures mostly just have this outline. Sometimes there's a little bit of paint inside, like partial infill, but often none at all.
So more like a line drawing than a fully colored-in picture?
Precisely. Think outline, not solid block.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's a pretty clear distinction. What else stands out?
Another big one. You hardly see any human-like figures, anthropomorphs.
Really? Because Guion and static polychrome were full of them, right?
Absolutely full of them. So the near total absence in LNF is really significant. It suggests a different focus for the artists. And another thing, you rarely see groups of animals depicted together in LNF. They tend to be solitary figures.
One animal at a time, usually.
Yeah.
And colors. Did they stick to certain paints?
Yeah, the palette seems pretty consistent. It's mainly monochrome, just one color. And that color is usually dark red or light red. Now, IIAP uses reds too, but it's also known for using a sort of mulberry purplish shade quite often. LNF seems to stick more to the straightforward reds.
Okay, so large outlined animals, mostly kangaroos, usually alone, painted in red, and almost no people. That's starting to sound quite distinct. What about their poses? How are they shown?
Generally quite static, often in profile, side-on view.
Not much action.
Not really. For the macropods, a common pose is with the back and hind legs sort of slightly stretched out,
Yeah.
and the tail either straight or maybe gently curving down.
Hmm.
Some researchers interpret this as maybe depicting prey animals captured in a moment of stillness, perhaps. It contrasts with IIP, where you often see animals in much more dynamic, varied poses.
Interesting interpretation. Like a snapshot. And anatomical detail, more or less than IIAP.
Generally less internal detail compared to IIAP. And something else quite noticeable, depictions of genitalia, which are actually pretty common in IIAP figures, are really scarce in LNS.
Okay, another difference. And where do they paint these? High up, low down?
Usually on vertical rock shelter walls, sometimes on ceilings, and occasionally even way up high on ledges.
So making an effort to place them. And geographically, you said concentrated in that northeast corner.
Yeah, primarily in those Drysdale and King George River catchment areas, based on the current findings.
Right. Now, I read they also look closely at the shapes, the body forms of the kangaroos and wallabies.
They did, yeah. They did a shape analysis. They could distinguish between more geometric forms, sort of angular, less detailed, and more naturalistic ones with smoother outlines, more anatomically correct, you could say.
Right.
And interestingly, they identified 5 specific body shape groups just within the LNF macropods that they didn't see in the earlier IIAP style. Another little fingerprint setting LNF apart.
Okay, the evidence is definitely mounting for LNF being its own thing. But the real clincher for placing it after IIAP, guiana, and static polychrome must be the layering, right? The superimposition you mentioned.
Absolutely critical. This is where the chronology gets locked down.
Yeah.
At several sites, they found LNF motifs painted directly on top of older IIAP figures, and also painted over Guian figures and over static polychrome figures.
So definitely later than all 3 of those.
Definitely later. But then the other key piece is that these same LNF paintings were found underneath examples of the much later Wandjina style.
Right, so it's sandwiched in time. LNF is younger than IIAP, Guian, and static polychrome, but older than Wandjina.
Exactly. That layering is like reading pages in a history book written on rock.
That's fantastic. And we have rough dates for those other styles, don't we? That helps narrow it down.
We do. The estimates can vary a bit, but generally IIAP is thought to be around, say, 17,000 to 13,000 years ago. So 17.2 to 13 Ka.
Okay, Ice Age times.
Yeah. Guian is often placed around 14 to 12,000 years ago, and static polychrome may be 12 to 9,000 years ago.
Still very ancient.
Very. And Wandjina art, that comes in much later, maybe starting around 5,000 years ago, give or take, and continuing.
Okay, so if LNF sits between static polychrome ending around 9,000 years ago and Wandjina starting around 5,000 years ago, that puts it firmly in the mid-to-late Holocene period.
Precisely. And that's a huge shift, because remember, it used to be just lumped in with IIAP way back over 13,000 years ago. This makes LNF potentially thousands of years younger than previously assumed.
Wow. Okay, so that redating isn't just a minor tweak, it changes the story.
It really does, because think about what it means. After that long period dominated by human figures, the Guian and static polychrome eras, spanning maybe 5,000 years or more, suddenly with LNF, the focus swings back primarily to animals.
That is interesting. A major thematic shift in their art. Why might that happen? Did the researchers suggest reasons for this return to animal focus?
They did. They linked it to broader things happening in the Kimberley during that mid-to-late Holocene period. It was a time of pretty significant environmental and social change.
That says?
Well, for one, sea levels had finally stabilized after the massive flooding that happened as the last ice age ended. The whole coastline changed.
Right, the landscape itself was transforming.
Massively. Also, new types of stone tools start appearing, like the distinctive Kimberley points.
New tech.
Yep. And there's linguistic evidence suggesting that the diversity of languages spoken in the region might have been increasing around this time, too.
So a lot going on. A dynamic period.
Definitely. And the researchers propose that maybe rock art, including this emerging LNF style, played a role in navigating all this change.
How so? Like a way to cope or make sense of things?
Sort of, yeah. Perhaps it functioned as a mechanism to reinforce social bonds or spiritual connections, maybe group identities, during a time when things felt like they were in flux. A way to maintain continuity, perhaps.
Makes sense. And The specific focus on animals and LNF.
Yeah.
How does that tie into Aboriginal culture? You mentioned totemism earlier.
Yes, that seems highly relevant here. Totemism in many Aboriginal cultures involves this incredibly deep, fundamental connection between people and the natural world, particularly animals. Animals are often seen not just as creatures, but as ancestral beings linked to specific groups of people, specific places. There's a shared origin, a lifelong kinship.
Right. It influences laws,
Everything. Social structure, spiritual practice, responsibilities to land and to the totem itself.
So the idea is that these large, prominent LNF animal figures could actually be representations of important totemic beings.
It's a very compelling interpretation. Depicting these animal totems, maybe particularly the macropods, which are so common in LNF, could have served multiple purposes in the context of the mid-to-late Holocene.
Like what?
Well, maybe marking territory.
Yeah.
As societies perhaps became a bit more settled or defined by stabilizing environments, maybe painting your group's totem was a way of saying, this is our country.
Okay, asserting identity and connection to place.
Yeah, and reinforcing that group identity internally, too. Maybe used in ceremonies related to social cohesion or initiation, or ensuring the continuity of the totem species, those increased ceremonies.
So the art wasn't just decorative, it was active. It did things in society.
Absolutely. It's thought to be deeply embedded in social and spiritual life.
It's fascinating. The idea that a visual theme like naturalistic animals can appear early on, like in IIAP, then kind of fade while human figures dominate, and then reappear centuries, millennia later, with LNF, but perhaps serving new or different purposes because the society itself has evolved.
Exactly that. It shows that art history isn't always a straight line from simple to complex, or one theme replacing another forever. Social needs change, environments change, and artistic expression adapts and sometimes circles back to earlier themes, but maybe with new meanings or new emphasis. LNF really highlights that complexity.
So let's try and wrap this up. The big insight here seems to be nailing down linear naturalistic figures as its own distinct style.
Definitely.
And crucially, placing it in the mid-to-late Holocene, much younger than we thought.
Yeah, that redating is key.
And this suggests a really interesting return to focusing art on the animal world, possibly linked to totemism, identity, and territory, happening during a period of major environmental and social shifts in the Kimberley.
That's the core takeaway. It reshapes our understanding of that middle period in Kimberley art history.
The aha moment for me is really seeing through this specific style just how tightly interwoven art, environment, social life, and spiritual beliefs likely were for these ancient communities. It's not just pictures on a wall.
Not at all. It's a window into a whole worldview, a whole way of being connected to the world. The LNF style gives us another piece of that incredible puzzle.
It really does. And it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What other stories are still held in ancient art, waiting for us to see them clearly? And what can these shifts in what people chose to paint tell us about the deeper currents of human history and our changing place in the world?
Loads to think about there.
Definitely. Well, thanks for digging into this with us today. It's been fascinating.